the introduction of a bill.
Resource Management Reform Bill, introduction.
That bill is set down for first reading, and the House now comes to questions for oral answer, and the first question stands in the name of Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, what policy directives has he given his two ministers attending the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Doha?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I've not provided any specific directives to the two ministers in the same way I didn't provide a specific directive to the acting leader of the House today of what colour to wear as she sat next to me. However, Cabinet has agreed to an updated international climate change negotiations mandate to guide New Zealand's general approach at the Doha meeting. It's unlikely that there will be a breakthrough at these talks. Our broad goal is to make continued progress towards a comprehensive agreement by 2020.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I want to hear this question. Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that delegates to the United Nations Climate Conference are discussing excluding New Zealand from international carbon markets because of the government's decision not to sign up to the second period of Kyoto commitments?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no, I'm sure there's plenty of discussions going on, but New Zealand can hold its head up high when it comes to climate change. Half of all of our emissions come from agriculture, and this is a government that's led the charge when it's come to building a global consensus for research in that area that is likely to do more to actually lower global emissions than any of the wacky ideas that the Greens come up with.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he think it's in New Zealand's best interests for it to be shut out of international carbon markets as a result of his government's decision not to sign up to further binding commitments?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, I wouldn't want to pass comment on something which is the member says has been discussed but certainly hasn't been agreed, but there would be some people who believe access to some of the international carbon markets that see very cheap price carbon coming into New Zealand is not a good thing. I thought that was something that the Members' Party was actually opposed to.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is he aware of the distaste with which many European countries are viewing New Zealand at Doha because of the demand from his government that New Zealand have full access to Kyoto-compliant units while rejecting a legal obligation to reduce emissions, which is the very reason the units were designed for in the first place?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I take all of it with a bit of a grain of salt. For a start off, the same European countries that member's talking about support their agricultural industries with enormous subsidies. Secondly, 85% of world emissions are excluded, so if they don't like what New Zealand's doing, they don't like what 85% of the world emissions from countries are doing. Thirdly, New Zealand will have its own binding target. And fourthly, New Zealand actually met its target in CP1. Under this government, emissions targets were met. Under the previous government, they went up by 23%.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Supplementary. Is he surprised that there is discussion on the possibility of excluding New Zealand from international carbon markets, given that the most senior United Nations climate change figure has said that she was very disappointed by New Zealand's decision not to sign up for the second commitment period?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, New Zealand finds itself with the majority of countries that represent 85% of emissions. New Zealand is going down the convention path. New Zealand will next year set a binding target, and that is something that we will meet. But, Mr. Speaker, we need to understand the philosophical difference here, and that is the Greens Labour government want a, if they ever get there, want a target of between 25 and 40% reduction.
PM's not actually, the Prime Minister's not actually responsible for a Greens Labour Party government.
Or what they might do.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I seek leave to table a document, a statement from Christiana Figueres saying that she was very disappointed that New Zealand will not enter Kyoto 2. It's dated November 9, 2012.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Dr. Russel Norman, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he now accept that his government's decision not to sign up to binding reductions has not only damaged our international reputation, but has threatened our access to the international carbon markets?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
No.
Dr. Russel Norman.
Supplementary. When his minister delivers New Zealand's main statement at Doha today, will he be arguing that the rest of the world step up action on climate change so that his government can freeload on their efforts? And does he believe that is doing our fair share?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know the exact details of Mr. Gross's speech, but I can say this. The argument that somehow New Zealand is freeloading is a joke. New Zealand is part of the global alliance which is delivering international science and research that will reduce methane and nitrate emissions. They represent half of all of New Zealand emissions. The world is getting more populated and more hungry, so the green solution is to shoot 1 in 5 cows, and this government solution is to find
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker, that is simply untrue and not relevant to the answer.
Order. Order. No, order. I don't think I need any. No. Order. The PM. Order. Well, order. I'm not sure members would want that, because I suspect they do want to be able to question the Prime Minister further today. All I would say to the member who do, and a point of order has been raised, and these interjections should stop. Okay, it's been reasonably light-hearted, but they should stop. But I say to the member, he accused the government of freeloading and is alleged in his question of freeloading. So the Prime Minister has some licence in responding, and he didn't. The way he couched the statement didn't, I think, anyone could understand. It wasn't really a serious description of any party's policy.
Question number 2, Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, what progress is the government making in managing its